Alrighty, you guys, we're gonna go on ahead and come back out of our closed session. I think we need a motion to come out and then a roll call.
I move we come out of closed session. I'm thinking.
Okay. And roll call vote?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so we are back in open session after having only discussed matters related to personnel issues during closed session. We're going to move on to item number 8 on our agenda, which is reports from subcommittees, beginning with community outreach. Member Fine?
Hold on just a second.
Oh, no, yeah, that'll come.
Okay. Okay, outreach. I lost my agenda. Here it is. Okay. We are continuing in outreach, in the outreach committee to, we met on October 22nd. Our next meeting will be November 26th. But we are continuing to make contact with the groups that are more, I don't know how to say this, different groups that will, in the community that might have contact with the police department in ways in which they want that to be better or could be improved. And we've talked about that in previous reports from us, so I'll just tell you we're continuing that. The outreach committee met with Mr. Steve Garcia, who is the nominee for the purposes of orientation. He is a prospective member of this board, and we met with him. He was delightful to meet with. I think he has a lot of really relevant experience. We all did, and I look forward to the council passing him onto this board. The only other thing that, press contacts. I wanted to let you know that the press has contacted me about a couple of things, both of which were unusual in that they involved things with members of the staff and members of the board that it would be, it makes me worry about whether or not there are contacts being made with the media that are not warranted and not wise. I just say that I think we'll have a discussion about this later, but I just wanted to say that I have, in every instance, circled them back to the person they're asking me about, instead of expressing an opinion about that, which I don't think is appropriate. I only wanted to add one other thing. Valerie and I went to a conference. We didn't get to go to NACOL, but we did get to go to the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference in Chicago, which was wonderful. And I would recommend to any board member that wants to go to a really great training for law enforcement. There were lots of things on community policing, and you may want to consider that as board members in your next go-around, maybe instead of going to NACOL. So that's the end of my report. Next meeting's November 26th.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Moving on, policy and procedure. Member Van Deventer has resigned. So Dr. Cass, will you be kind enough to lead us through that?
So there's been a number of POB or OPA and PPRB policies which have gone through the approval process, and the list, and there's also a series of letters that were prepared for presentation at the previous board meeting, which I think should be presented to the board tonight for approval. They're dated October 10th, and they're attached to your packet. So these went through the policy and procedure subcommittee in sometime before October 10th, and were intended for presentation to the board. So if you would look at those, the board recommended that these be approved and sent to the chief. Well, I think I would entertain a motion for sending those. I can move that, or.
I'll entertain the motion.
Okay, I move that we approve the letters that were recommended to be sent to the chief on dated October 10th and attached to your packet, so.
And a second? Are you second? Oh, you're not.
Somebody else from the committee.
I'm trying. So we have a motion from Dr. Cass to approve the letters and a second from Member Olivas. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
The second item that's listed here are policies 341 and 346, actually, the first item. And I believe, Director Harness, I'd like to ask you what you would recommend on policies 341 and 346. I believe these were, one is a CASA policy. No, I'm sorry, neither one. 346 is a CASA policy, I believe. Is that right? Discipline system?
Chair Galloway, member Dr. Cass. Yes, actually 346, I was tasked with preparing commentary for PPRB when it comes to PPRB. It was at OPA. 346 is the discipline matrix, discipline system. Oh, yes, there were concerns about the breadth of sanctions for level 7 that go all the way out to 8 offenses, I believe. There were also concerns about even level 1 sanctions rolling off to be not to be considered after 8 years, changing in those timings. And then there was the concern that the policy doesn't address similar policies for considering progressive discipline, so that they're not classified. The example is you have a level 7 failure to use lapel video, and then you could have a level 7 traffic accident preventable. The department at this point does not consider both of those, if they happened within a year, to be similar enough for progressive discipline. And the department wants to address that and have that, but I don't believe that the 346 as it's written addresses those issues. So I have not prepared officially how I think the recommendation for how the policy should be drafted at this point.
And 341 is, can you say something about that?
Chair Galloway, member Dr. Cass. Yeah, 341 I think was fine. It is the policy that incorporates administrative investigations. And the only real rewrite might be that it needs to be CPOA board as opposed to police oversight board at this point.
And these were both presented to OPA on October 9th, and they haven't yet come to PPRB, but should be soon, I presume. But there's no action required. I just wanted to, bring an update to what, because those were singled out in the agenda. So we went from item 2 on that agenda to item 1, and now there's one other item, and that is the number of policies which have gone through PPRB, and I've been attending PPRB meetings as the board representative somewhat unofficially, and I believe that should be addressed at this meeting tonight. But in the meantime, let me report on what happened with respect to the policies that were reviewed at PPRB. I want to go back a ways, and there's quite a list, but on There were a number of policies, SOP 242, DWI investigations, 243, roadblocks and checkpoints, small 215, which is small unarmed, well, drones for short, 181, which is the proactive response team, the Internal Affairs Division, Internal Affairs Force Division 161, and those policies were all presented on September 4th to PPRB, and they were passed. I don't believe I attended those meetings, but I believe they were passed, approved by the board representative. And the comment deadline has been extended on those because we had missed, we'd missed some deadlines because of meeting problems. But the deadline, I believe that they were extended to was November 15th, which of course is tomorrow, and we're going to miss that deadline as well. They were reviewed by the Policy and Procedures Board on October 3rd, and there are some of these are the letters that we approved on as item 2. So that's just kind of an update on those policies. We still have some loose ends to tie up that resulted from having to change that's been occurring on the policy board. After that, there were policies which were presented on October 2nd to PPRB, which passed, and these include the DWI section, SOP 139, investigation of property crimes, which is SOP 286, and bait car program, which is SOP 288. They were passed with approval of the representative, and I believe the director as well. They had a due date of comment of November 4th, again, a date that's passed. The most recent policies which have gone through the PPRB were set on October 16th, which includes 273, which is collection, submission, and disposal of evidence and property. And I might comment that that's a policy that was a result of high-profile cases where evidence collection was not necessarily done properly, and there was a special order which was issued to deal with that, and I believe the new policy has incorporated that special order into the policy. So that's in progress. The comment deadline on that is November 25th. So we're going to miss a number of deadlines, but I think it's better to get these straightened out in due course rather than try to rush through something that we won't be able to meet and approve. Let me just continue the list of the October 16th policies. Sworn personnel positions is 315, duty assignments and transfers 317, bids and transfers 325, retirement observance 323 were all passed by PPRB. And these aren't necessarily very controversial, or there's not any significant changes, but again, the deadline on these for comment would be the 25th. Most recently, on October 30th, there was a policy presented, SOP 218, which is contact with individuals and disabilities, with individuals with disabilities. That was passed, and I might comment that at that PPRB meeting, there was a representative from the hard of hearing community who was there to give his input into the policy, and it was incorporated by the PPRB. Let's see, one other policy that was passed at that PPRB meeting was SOP 145, which is the Family Abuse and Stalking Training Team. And at the very most recent PPRB meeting, which was yesterday, there were 4 policies which were considered. One was command staff responsibilities, which was tabled for future, or for further revision. One of the interesting things about command staff responsibilities is that it contained, even though the command staff is subject to the same disciplinary matrix as the rest of the police department, there were no disciplinary recommendations or no disciplinary codes associated with the policy. So they've decided to go back and add some codes to be consistent. Three other policies, SOP 324, which is line of duty, death notice, and benefits, 195, which is a traffic section, and 154, honor guard unit, all passed and unanimously, and I believe all, myself and Director Harness voted to approve those. So that's kind of a crude summary of where we are right now, and we have some catching up to do.
Any questions on that? I have a couple, but,
I don't have any questions on that. Go ahead.
okay. First, there are, and you may have gone through this, which is going to lead to my second question for you. There are 5 additional policies on our agenda, 2-15, 2-42, 116, 249, and 332. Did we have letters that were sent to the, and I don't know the answer to this, to the CPOA office regarding these policies?
I'm sorry, are you talking about?
I'm actually asking Katrina real quick, and then, do you know of that? For policies 2-15, 2-42, 1-16, 2-49, 3-32? Did Member Vandeventer, before she resigned, submit any letters?
Those are the ones that you.
Not
These are
those.
Yes, that's right.
These have 161, 243, 331, and 181. That's why I'm asking about the other 5. And I think I double-checked myself.
So in the first letter, it's 161, 215, 242, 116,
Got it.
249, 332. in the first
Okay.
letter.
So they're all in.
They're all included in the one. Got it. Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then you're very, very detailed. Can we get a copy of your SOPs as part of our board packet in the future so that we can follow along? That would be helpful
Sure.
to me. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but, okay. Those are my 2.
I have, we obviously have a vacancy as the chair of the Policy and Procedures Committee. Is that being handled?
I expect it will be handled at our next committee meeting, where I expect that Dr. Cass will be asked to fill in. And I assume he will agree, but we
And
can
I
handle it
will
now.
accept, I think, though, that we can settle at this meeting our official representation for the board at the PPRB. I mean, that's a decision, that's a board decision, and we can do that without respect to who the chair is. I mean, without having a chair. I mean,
So do you
we
need
obviously-
that to
I'm
be,
sorry.
do you need that to be reinstated? That it be you?
Well, I think it would be good just to make it official. I mean, I've been filling in on that position, but it's been unofficial since it's never been brought before the board, or it has not been brought before the board since I've been unofficially doing it. So
Madam Chair, would
so
you
what I'm
entertain
doing
a
is I'm
motion to
asking
that
for.
I would entertain a motion to do that, and also, if we can couple those 2 things and just take care of everything in one fell swoop, I would entertain a motion for both PPRB representation and
Chair of the committee.
OPA, and as well as chair of the committee.
Okay, so I so move that Dr. Cast be asked if he would consider doing all of those things on behalf of the board.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
I do have one discussion
Oh,
item.
sorry.
Not because I don't support it, but just as a housekeeping matter, I'm not sure that it's appropriate to lump the chair's vote with the PPRB, just because that's a committee, a local committee level decision. So if the board then sets a precedent to vote on that as a whole, I feel like that creates some conflict. Not because I don't support that.
Would you feel
agree.
more comfortable just doing that at the meeting then? At our
Just
next
for
meeting?
housekeeping
Okay,
purposes.
Okay,
fine by
so.
me.
If we could amend that.
Tina has something.
Chair Galloway, your policies and procedures provide that the chair just shall appoint the PPRV designee from the board. There doesn't need to actually be a formal vote. That is a chair designation. And with regard to the second portion of how subcommittee chairs are appointed, Member Olivas is correct. It is the subcommittee that makes that formal appointment of the chair during the subcommittee meetings.
Thank
Okay,
you.
And I'd like to withdraw my motion.
Awesome.
Will you
Dr.
just
Cass,
appoint?
if you will accept, I'm appointing you as our representative at PPRB and OPA.
Yes, I accept.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, Case Review Committee.
Yes, we had our last meeting on October the 22nd, 2019, and we reviewed cases, and I just verified they were all voted on, and they are on this evening's agenda. And our next meeting is scheduled, let's see, on the November the 26th, 2019. And I'm really excited about this meeting because when we went to the round table, Joanne asked about the cases that we've been waiting on for a year and a half. So everyone came to decision. What we were going to do is that at the next case review meeting, we are going to be discuss those cases, how they're going to be given to us, and how we are going to deal with them. After this, we will present to the full board to vote on this decision, how we want to move forward. But I'm really excited how this meeting, how we're all collaborating together. Not only the case review committee will be there, but Elizabeth Martinez has RSVP'd, and she will be there. And let's see.
Lindsay Van Meter is gonna be
Lindsay
there
from the city attorney will be there, and Tina will be on vacation. But she will be sending Lynn, who's amazing, in her place. So once again, I'm really excited that this gives us the opportunity to move forward on these cases. I've also invited Board Member Waits, because he's been here since the beginning, and they've been through this before. And he will have some great ideas of how we're going to move forward. Thank you.
The two other items that are on here, the notice of board review for complaints and interviewing complainants, these things have been addressed. These were things we discussed at our last meeting, and we will discuss again. But we want to make sure, we've had several people in the community say that they were not contacted by the staff. We wanted to make sure that the complainant is contacted if it's possible, and that we also discussed the importance for somebody being notified that their case is coming before the full board. And so that will also be part of our conversation. So I just wanted to make sure we were clear about why those things were here. We wanted to inform you that is the case. We are looking at those items and putting some things in place, which I think personnel will talk about.
Okay. Any questions for CRC? Okay. Personnel Committee met on October 25th. Things that we discussed were the facilitated discussions and strategic planning that I believe Dr. Cass is going to present a proposal on. We also discussed processes or criteria for board member removals and a tool for executive director evaluation moving forward. So the discussion for the board member removal, and I think just a couple of additional procedures that we should have in place. We have as homework items to come back at our next personnel meeting and kind of start the skeleton process of building that stuff out. The tool for the executive director's evaluation, I believe Director Harness, you were going to send us some information on what the city uses. Diane had made a recommendation that we were interested in looking at. So if you could just email that to the committee, that would be fantastic. With that, I'm going to defer for a moment and let Dr. Cass bring us up to speed on the facilitated discussion, and then we'll handle the other couple of business towards the end.
Are you skipping forward? I'm sorry? I mean, this is an item on, I think it's item E.
Okay. Then we'll just go ahead. motions on coming out of our closed session?
Yes, Madam Chair, if you'll entertain a motion, I would like to move that the board accept and forward the communication to the executive director as drafted by council.
Have a motion, do we have a second? Okay. Any discussion? No. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. The next piece of business is just some housekeeping kind of procedural stuff that we'll be giving to Director Harness. But we did discuss something just now as part of the CRC that we sort of touched on with notice to complainants. We touched on it, but I don't think that we agreed to necessarily add that to this particular document. I don't know if we want to.
I'm sorry, what?
The noticing to complainants, if we wanted to add it, if we wanted to, it's not that particular one,
Oh,
before the,
yeah.
of their upcoming,
Well, we can discuss it in case you
okay,
come
so
back to you.
go as is and then move forward? I'm good with that. All right. So we'll be giving that to Director Harness after the meeting. And our next personnel meeting is scheduled for I'm sorry, the what?
It's on the flip side.
Thank you. Yeah, November 22nd. But we have a conflict with the monitoring team coming in, so we're going to need to reschedule that meeting, just so that there's no gray areas as to what is open for the public and what is not. So Katrina or Director Harness, if somebody could get back with us as to when the room is available for us to reschedule our personnel meeting, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Chair Galloway,
Yes.
on that subject, I'm, as far as the policy, the next policy and procedure review subcommittee meeting is scheduled for December 5th. I'm going to be out of town on that day. If we could reschedule that, I would appreciate it. So I could recommend possibly the 9th, and that would be the same day,
I'm out of town that day.
that day. All right.
That's the day we're having
Oh, yeah, no, sorry, the 9th. Forgive me.
That's the day I believe we were going to meet
Yeah.
with the monitor, but
Yep.
I mean, that's, is there a way to schedule around that, that meeting? That's a date I have to suggest. It would fit in that it would be before our next POB meeting. It turns out this is kind of a short gap. We just had a 5-week gap between meetings, and I think this one's going to end up being closer to 3, so,
Sure, I'll see if the room will get.
okay.
Thank you, Katrina. All right. Anything else? Any other questions about personnel? Okay. Moving on then to our discussion points. Item number 9 on the agenda. So typically, my understanding, although I've only been a part of one of these, is that after we come back from our training sessions, that we just kind of give a little recap of what we found particularly of interest or helpful. So if we could just start at one end and go around, whichever, I always start over here. Why don't we start over here?
I did not attend, so I don't have any comment.
Easy
peasy. Dr. Cass?
I attended, but at the moment, I'm kind of overwhelmed with the other things that are going on. So the NACO meeting was in Detroit. It was interesting to go to Detroit, and which has had a lot of experience with police issues. I thought it turns out that there seems to be a fairly strong relationship between the chief of police in Detroit and the oversight agency, and I'm not sure whether it's whether it's a healthy relationship or if it's or what. But it was interesting to sort of observe Detroit situation. That's all I have.
I also did not attend any conference.
Okay. I went to NACOL as well, just a couple of the notes that I wrote down. Gentleman from New York, I probably will butcher his name, but I think it was Muriel or something to that effect. When they're having conversations with their police department, I just thought this was an interesting perspective. I have no opinion one way or the other yet. They asked their police department, how would you handle a situation if you didn't have a badge or a gun or handcuffs on you? Like if you didn't have those tools at your disposal, and the knowledge that you had those tools at your disposal, how would you handle any given situation that you were to walk into? If you're not actively involved in keeping people safe in any given situation, you know, should you be evaluating the appropriateness of your presence? The police are the community, and the community are the police. Those are things to keep in mind as well that are important. Somebody from Canada, they mentioned that their executive director can have never been a law enforcement officer. Don't write policies that are restrictive, be able to change with the times. This came from NACOL's Director of Operations. Use of the word independent, I'm not quite sure what I meant there, and stay away from gentlemen's agreements. So make sure that everything is documented and you're not doing things on a handshake. We don't do anything with correctional facilities, but if we do, there was some interesting stuff there if we decide to in the future. Does APD, probably something for the Policy and Procedure Committee to look into, does APD have a policy on sexual harassment, protecting civilians or prisoners? They probably, and I'm sure they do have one for just within the workplace, but is there something in place to protect people that they are interacting with that are not part of APD? We were talking about the mediation program, and Director Harness and I both kind of got up to the microphone and started asking questions because ours has been in limbo for a while. So determining what types of allegations are appropriate for mediation was something that they suggested focusing on. Making sure that you build a constituency, so of community members, the police department, making sure that the people that we interact with are fully on board with any kind of mediation policy. Provide mediation information at the intake, so when calls are coming in or emails come in, to file complaints, providing that information at that very first conversation would be good. Having an in-house mediator is something that a lot of places do, they're on premises. Making sure that training on intake is done really well, that whoever's doing that process within the office, the agency office, making sure that they're trained very well to look for specific things that could really be handled through mediation, and then giving them the tools to kind of advocate for that so that that becomes an option that's palatable. Having supplemental brochures specifically on mediation. Having officers within APD attend the same mediation training as the oversight agency is going to have or expect to have. It gives the mediators an idea of who the officers are. It provides the officers with knowledge of what a mediation is so that they can act as you know, I don't want to say responsible parties in that, but excited parties in mediation as well. So I thought those were interesting points that came up out of that. My takeaways.
I owe you an apology because I put my IACP thing before because I didn't see it was here. My bad. I'm done. I did my part. You do yours.
Okay, I went with Joanne to the IACP conference in Chicago as the chief's training, and I've been through a lot of training all the years when I worked at the district attorneys, and this is the best training I've ever been to. There was such a diversity, human trafficking, use of force, I think in the days we had about 20 hours worth of training. Like I said, it was a fast pace. And I recommend anyone who wants to on this board that, you should go to this training. And if you want, I have the book, if you'd like to see an example of some of the classes that they offer in this session. And next year it's in New Orleans, if that helps. Thank you.
Okay, I went to the NACO conference, probably my 5th time, and again, the best lessons learned were the hallway conversations that you have with individuals from all over the country. I think has been over the years the best part of the conference. So I didn't know we were going to do this, so I don't have any detailed reports. So.
All right, moving on, because I don't think anybody went to Las Vegas, right?
No.
Ed did.
Ed, you went to Las Vegas. Anything that you were able to mine out of that one that you'd like to share? Or any of them, because I know.
Chair Galloway, I think the Las Vegas, I already reported on that. That was way back,
Okay,
6-7 months ago.
okay. All righty, then item D on our agenda, audits of cases. This specifically is item 132-18. That seems to be the never-ending case. And as more and more time goes on, more and more information is learned by various law enforcement agencies and whatnot. And so I would like to just have a discussion about having another set of eyes look at this case, not for anything that our agency may have missed, but with the mindset of having a look at the policies and the procedures that are in place within APD that have allowed for this many instances of interaction with this particular family, and not have any idea that there was anything quite so severe going on with those children. I'd like to have that discussion because I think that case is just important. I think that there are cases that come up that are disturbing on a variety of levels, and that there has to be something more to learn from these things. And I think maybe a fresh set of eyes after a year might yield some results. Yes, ma'am.
I would say that we agreed to defer this case to the next meeting, and to have a conversation about that now seems inappropriate to me. The Case Review Committee has had this more than everybody, and my thought is that what we are trying to do and what the complaints that we've gotten, the reason it's going on so long, in my view, is because we are trying to hold the agency staff to a standard that is not within the scope of work for them. We as a community are frustrated. I would say that we should, and I've said this before, we should segregate out those things that are related to SOPs and violations and all of those things, which is the purview of the staff and their recommendations, and our bigger conversation, which I agree should happen, not just about this case, but about other cases that are also as well known in this community. And it has to do with the relationship between CYFD and APD and the expectations of this community. To me, that's a much more fruitful conversation, but I'd like to see somebody from Crimes Against Children here to have that conversation with us, and somebody from CYFD to have that conversation with us. We're unsatisfied with the answer, but we're going to the wrong place for the answer, and the wrong place is 132-18 in terms of its review by the staff. The staff did their work, and the Case Review Committee decided that our recommendation to the board was the staff did everything they could do within the bounds of their job. And that doesn't mean that we should leave it. It means that we should have a bigger conversation, but I don't think the conversation's about this case. I think it's about the interplay between APD and the Crimes Against Children unit and the community's expectation that children will be safer than they appear to be in these cases. And so I think that's a different conversation and is the purview of the board. I just don't think it should be tied to this case.
And I see you, and I just want to clarify real quick. What I'm talking about is uncoupling the case from the agency's work. And I don't know how else to say 132.18 other than 132.18.
Well, I think there are several cases
That-
that are related to, Omar Varela is another case, Victoria Martin's case is another case, this is a third case. There are reasons to have that conversation and have it here in a public forum.
Exactly. It's just never ending. Like, there's still stuff unfolding from this particular one. It's not kind of settled. Member Waits?
Yeah, I totally agree with Board Member Fine. We've looked at this case, and we've looked at it, and now you're asking us to put more resources into it and come up with a solution when the end result is that we're not going to have anything to do with it. You know what I mean? It's already been investigated, and I think we should move on from it. That's just my opinions.
Well, on that particular case, I think we agree, but I think there is a place for the board, because we are the voice of the community, to have that dialogue and find out where the holes are and why does this keep happening. I mean, what's ever happening in this particular case that keeps going on is not the measure that the agency should be measured against, because they had a moment in time and they recognize it. If you're talking about child abuse and the interplay between APD and CYFD and what can be better about that, that is a great conversation for this board to have.
And that's what I'm saying, not the investigation that was conducted. This is not a discussion about the investigation. This is a discussion about the policies and procedures that surround this case and where are the holes.
But
and
why
having a
limit it
separate
to just this case?
And we don't have to. We don't have
Okay.
to. I just don't have the numbers for them, because we don't have the investigations for them.
Well, we've already gone through the cases, those
But not
cases.
Victoria, right?
Yeah, well,
Right?
we can, all I'm saying is that if we're going to discuss a case, we already have something pending, an appeal pending. We need to decide about that. I just don't think having that conversation right here, right now is smart.
Okay. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we all know how I felt about removing this case from the agenda, so I'm not going to litigate those merits again. But I think that going back to this broader issue of an audit of the case, I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about it as an audit of this case. The complainant in this case actually raises most of the big picture issue. Most of the issues raised here are big picture issues. And I think that everybody acknowledges that and acknowledges that disciplinary actions for the officers and people involved in this are not necessarily the end result that we're looking for here. So I think we should kind of get out of that mindset of sort of, let's punish the agency, let's punish the officer. That's not what I'm looking for here. I don't think that's what the complainant is looking for. And I don't think that's what we need as a city. And it's our responsibility as a board to try and support that action. And we talk about expending more resources. We shouldn't spend any more resources on this. Then what should we spend our resources on? We've never audited a case in the history of this board. It may glean nothing. And if it does, that's all right too. But as the chair stated, another set of eyes here can't hurt, and it's not about trying to find flaws in the agency's processes or the agency's abilities. It may glean other things that the agency just frankly doesn't have the time or the resources to do. And as a board, frankly, yes, we can have that discussion, but I don't think we necessarily, as individuals, have the time or the resources or the knowledge, even if we bring in the investigators and we bring in CYFD and we bring in Crimes Against Children and all these different sources. I don't know that we as a board actually have the resources and the ability and the time to synthesize that information and summarize it in the way that an audit potentially could if that was the choice of the board and the action we took. I don't think we can take any action on it tonight, but I think it's something we should all be considering, and given the gravity of this case and the other ones like it that we've mentioned here tonight, I don't see why we wouldn't do that, because it's
Well, I would
very
not,
important.
I'm sorry.
Member St. John?
Yeah, after hearing what you just said, I totally agree, even though we have deferred this to next month, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it now. I agree with you that everything that's done by Ed's office has been done, but we should send this case to an audit and let somebody else look at it and see what they come back with, where the holes were. And maybe from that would be looked at as a learning for SOPs, and also learning for us. Like you said, we've never had one audited, and I think that this would be a good case to do that with.
Well, is anybody else wanting to talk? Okay, I would just say that if we're going to audit this, we should audit the other 3 cases too, because the other cases may add to that. We're trying to put 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag, and that's the problem here, okay? The problem is that I don't understand why auditing this case helps anybody, okay? And I think that if there is an audit of all 3 cases, using an audit of let's say, the IA investigations, I just think the agency has done everything they can do on this, and if somebody from the outside could show us something with those 3 cases and show us some patterns there that would be problematic, then that would be useful. But it is beyond the scope of the agency to deal with this. It is our job as a board to take a look at this and ask those questions.
I agree. Tina, what is our ability as far as auditing a case? I know we can request a random sampling. Can we ask for 3 cases? I believe we can do 1, but can we do 3?
Chair
We
Galloway,
can-
that's,
we can
it shows
audit
up in
any
your
set of
ordinance, and it's board audits and access to files. So what you can do is you can have an annual audit that's a random sample, but in exceptional circumstances and for purposes of promoting an enhanced measure of quality assurance in the most challenging cases, the board may, by a vote of 2/3 of the members of the board, perform an audit or direct an audit be performed on any individual citizen police complaint investigation.
But that's citizen police investigation is not right.
I'm keying in on that. I don't think we have the authority to audit whatever case we want. We can't just say we want to audit a case. We have to audit a case that's related to a complaint, and I believe the only one that would qualify is this case that's before us here in that case. And I think that either way, it still shines a lot of light on a very, very sad and important situation. And as the ordinance talks about extenuating circumstances, essentially, if this doesn't qualify, what does? I'm not really sure where else to go with that.
We have this on here, Tina, audit of cases. Do we have to spell out what case we want to audit? Is that something we need to save for our next agenda, or does this item cover us for an action?
If the board would like to take a vote and you have the 2/3 vote to do that, it does talk about audits of cases. If there's a contemplated action on a specific case, it would be best to hold it over for the next meeting with a specific agenda item, listing the case with the idea that it would be up for a vote for an audit by the board so as to provide the most notice to the public.
Does our possible audit on item number 11, I know we deferred, the intention was to defer the appeal, but does that suffice, or is it just safer to wait?
Chair Galloway, under the item that has been deferred till next month, if it hadn't have been deferred, yes, where it says possible audit and it lists the case 132-18, that would be sufficient to provide notice.
So we will add this to our agenda for next month.
I have a question for you. It's my understanding that, to my way of thinking, it's too small a sample. My understanding of audits was that we were looking for trends and that we were looking for things that were of issue for the police department. Is there anything that would preclude us from auditing the IA file for child abuse cases resulting in death? Well, I'm just saying, or any subset of that. Is all I'm saying is what you said, what you read from there said civilian cases. Okay, is there nothing in the ordinance, or is there anything that precludes us in the ordinance that says we can't audit IA cases if we want to?
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine. The only thing it talks about in your in the ordinance generally for board audits, it also talks about a random sample of 10% of individual civilian police complaint investigations involving use of force. And then also the language I just read, which was for a specific case in exceptional circumstances. But that talks about a specific case. But if you would like to have a randomized sample or a broader cross-section.
What if we just said child abuse cases in the last 2 years, 6 years, whatever it is we want to do? Could we do that and say we want to audit? Because on serious use of force cases, those are all IA things. They're not civilian complaints. So if we could audit use of force cases, we should be able to do that, have access to that. I don't see anything in the ordinance that says we can't.
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine. The actual language specifically talks about use of force and the random sampling for the audit function. There is no other discussion in the policies and procedures of the board or the ordinance aside from that specific section. However, the board is tasked with 50% of its time dealing with policy. And so it may be that this is a discussion to have with the pertinent subcommittee, with the input from the city, because just because the ordinance or the policies don't specifically provide for it doesn't mean that there can't be collaboration to allow the board to work on those policy recommendations or any other investigation that it would like.
Okay. So we could do it. We could ask.
Always ask. Okay. Well, is there anybody else that wants to weigh in on this? No? Okay, then on next month's agenda,
Are we voting on this?
no, we can't.
We can't vote on whether or not we are having an audit?
It would be best not to.
Okay, I'm not in favor of that, not unless we can audit it.
Okay. Next is CPOA contracting a facilitator. This is yours, Dr. Cass, right?
We've, this is an issue that was started several months ago, and I think you're familiar with the draft proposal that was circulated that came out of the Personnel Subcommittee that suggests and has been approved for consideration by the entire board to hold a facilitated meeting of board and agency staff with the purpose of improving communication and relations and defining better what it is what we're about and how we're going to do it. And there is a process in place, or a contract in place with the city, that allows for a facilitator to be hired through the alternative dispute resolution program that the city has. The city would pay for the facilitator. The mechanism would be for the facilitator, or at least suggested mechanism would be for the facilitator to interview all the participants for the facilitated meeting beforehand, find out what their issues are, and then hold a facilitated meeting among all the participants with this background information to start. So I would like to move that the CPOA contact the city to provide a facilitator under their facilitation program, and start this process with the hope that we could, have the first facilitated session by mid-January. So that's my motion.
Second.
Any further discussion on this? Yes, sir.
I just want to thank Chair Galloway and Member Dr. Cass for their work on this. This is a really very important and I think a very healthy thing for the board and the agency to do, and I just want to applaud you both for your work on it, and let's get it done.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Board member qualifications, we
did that.
We did that. And meeting attendance.
Yeah, this is
yours as well?
This is also my item. This is the reason I put this on the agenda is because we've had a couple of subcommittee meetings that have been canceled in anticipation that there wouldn't be a quorum. And I asked Council Gooch to provide an opinion as to whether, how it was appropriate to cancel meetings. And I believe there is no provision to cancel a scheduled meeting of the subcommittee or the board, but rather the way that situation is resolved is if a meeting is scheduled, the meeting occurs, and if a quorum does not appear, the meeting is adjourned for lack of a quorum. But it's necessary to hold, to at least make an attempt to hold the meeting. And what I would like to do is get that to be clarified to the board so that we respect each other's time, because the time that I spend in preparation for a meeting is usually a lot longer than the duration of the meeting. And so if we're going to cancel a meeting, it doesn't save me any time, it just wastes the time that I've spent in preparation. So in the spirit of working together, I think there are provisions in the policies and procedures that if a board member is going to miss a subcommittee meeting, that he or she find a substitute to take their place. And I think that we should make every effort to hold the meetings that we have scheduled and use that tool as a way to do that. So this is just a proposal that the board recognize that this is a real problem in my view, and that I would like to see a commitment from the board to do that, to hold our meetings when we schedule them.
Member Armijo Pruitt?
I have a quick question. For subcommittee meetings, is there a quorum needed? There are no action items and.
No, it's not necessary to actually have a quorum, but in order to you can review business and, have some discussion of what the business is without having a quorum. So when it gets down to one person, no, it's a little
difficult.
But in order to vote to move anything to the full board, you need to have a quorum.
But we never do more than make a recommendation to the board.
I know, but we make a formal action at that point to do it. And my understanding has been, and the reason that we've canceled meetings is when we don't have a quorum in order to do so. We can't authorize business on the board's behalf at the subcommittee level, but we do move stuff to the board to do that.
So, kind of along those same lines as an operational point, and maybe it's a better question for Attorney Gooch, but if subcommittees can't make binding decisions on behalf of the board, and yes, we can vote to make a recommendation, but could we not also, if it's a meeting without a quorum, report as a chair or a member, we discussed this item and this is what we discussed. It might not be a recommendation, but it's a way to both move that business forward if it's non-controversial, and at the same time respect the members' times that are available for those types of things.
Good.
It doesn't seem like we have to have a recommendation on everything.
That's a good point.
Well,
I'm sorry, so like the case review committee, the way that we work, we review cases, but we vote to move them to the full board. Or sometimes we vote to send them back with.
To recommend them on the consent agenda.
Yeah, the consent or non-consent agenda. So I think it would be really difficult, and
It would be hard to get a replacement
yeah.
to that. The other side of that is we've had experience with a member consistently not showing up, like 4 times in a row. That's problematic as well. The same person, you still have 3 people there to vote, but you have the same person not show up. And there's got to be some limit to that. If you aren't willing to commit to the monthly meetings of the subcommittee, then if it's a board meeting, you can only miss 3.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Chair Galloway and Board Member Armijo Pruitt, you're correct in that you can't have more than a quorum of the entire board on the subcommittee, but what your policies and procedures provide is that that subcommittee shall only conduct business when a quorum of the subcommittee is present. So it is not so much an Open Meetings Act issue at that point, it's an internal governance requirement based on your policies and procedures that if you don't have the quorum of your subcommittee, that subcommittee cannot conduct business.
Thank you for that. So I would like to just say that, having just started working again, my availability during the middle of the day is gone. And so with upcoming committee meetings, I'm not going to be available, and I think I've let everybody know that. But it also sounds like there's going to be some real difficulty with scheduling, coordinating meetings outside of that time. And I think that the concern about whether people are attending the meetings also stems from that. Like, you know, being able to take off time from work is not, you know, twice a month or whatever is not really feasible for me.
And I think that you've run into that problem as well. I certainly have. I don't know about, yeah. So we have that balance that we've got to strike too. Maybe we just need to sit down at our individual committee meetings this coming month, see what times are going to be available, or can we conduct that kind of stuff via email just amongst the committee because it's not a quorum of the board?
Chair Galloway, yes, you can, and I just will take this opportunity with the change in the number of the composition of the board to also raise the issue that you must now reduce each subcommittee to no more than 3 members per subcommittee so that you are not in a quorum of the board at your subcommittee until we have the additional member added.
Interesting point. Does that same quorum rule apply to that?
Chair Galloway, the Roberts Rules of Order would say that a quorum would still be 5. However, the Open Meetings Act states that a quorum is
Of members sitting?
seated.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I've kind of got into a little bit of discussion with this, and you know, we said that we're going to work to accommodate with Tara, but we're going to have it on our next case review committee, because I also need to work with Ed, because his staff's going to he's going to have to figure out his staff to work in the evening. We also will have no security, so he would have to work on hiring security and where the added expense is going to come to. So there's a lot of logistics we need to work out.
But we have to accommodate the
Yeah,
board
that's what
members
I'm
who are
saying. So,
working
yeah.
full-time, and that's got to be at the starting point.
That's, yeah.
Yes.
Madam Chair, yeah, I would just add, you know, if we want this board to be inclusive and diverse, I don't know how much of our city works, but I know probably the majority of it, and I think the majority of this board does. And so, you know, I'm in that boat. I'm the guy that's actually missed 3 subcommittee meetings in a row because it's scheduled at 12 o'clock in the middle of the day.
And they last.
You know,
and
and they may last 2 or 3 hours, and you know, I'm not trying to be selfish here, but that's just not something I can accommodate. And I think if you're looking at the broader population of the city, you know, there's a lot of people that are going to look at that and say, sorry, I can't commit to that.
Well, I think some of the meetings are going to have to be after work hours, and that means we have to find a location where we can meet publicly, and the public can come. So we need that location because it doesn't seem like it's the Plaza del Sol building. So could we meet at the Academy? I mean, you know, is that open all the time? You know?
We
What
used
about
to
a public
have
library?
outreach meetings here after hours. What, is there, not here, Plaza del Sol, is there a reason that can't be?
That's what Valerie was just saying, the doors are locked and it's.
Well, I
there's no security.
just said that I wanted to discuss with Ed, because to me it's very important that we have security, because our history proves that we
Well,
need it.
For
So-
CRC, for sure.
Chair Galloway, the issue with the Plaza del Sol building after 6 o'clock, because of security shortages within the city, where there used to be an evening person there, there is not routinely one that can be counted on, so the building does get locked up. And the only access is badge access after 6 o'clock, so there would be no one there. So that's
We need to find a
And so
location we
that,
can meet.
that presents an issue where consistently, we always had an evening person. We do not have that any longer at the Plaza del Sol building.
What time does that person leave? At 6?
Chair Galloway, 5.
At 5? Okay.
So if we set up like
At
if a meeting
4.
started at 4:45, it would
Well-
just be a matter of not being able to get back into the building if we left it, right?
Or if you're with CRC and you've got somebody who's upset about cases and needing to have security there.
Yeah.
But for the other committees, it shouldn't be a problem.
So if the building's locked, but don't we have a responsibility, because it's an open meeting, that how are the
Yeah.
outside people going to
Right.
come in that want to hear, and they have a right to speak? So I'm not sure how that would work.
Yes, Chair Galloway, Member St. John, yes, a public meeting must be accessible by the public throughout its duration.
Well, does the city have some way to accommodate that, to have evening meetings that are secure somewhere that we can be?
Chair Galloway, Vice Chair Fine, that's something that we will have to consult with security about.
Okay.
Can you let us know something, maybe by end of next week? Do we have any meetings between now and then?
We have meetings Tuesday.
Yeah, we have our meeting
in
Tuesday, but it's
Hartford
during the
because
day, so
she's
it's fine.
working.
For CRC?
Yeah, it's during the day.
But you guys will have a quorum with the two of you, so that's okay.
And Leonard's coming.
And Leonard's coming too.
Yeah, so you guys will be fine, so it's not an issue for this coming week. I
Right.
don't think we have anything except for next Friday, but we're gonna push that back. Push it off, so I think if you can get us some information on that by end of week at the latest next week, that would be great, so we know what our options are. All right, yes,
I'm just throwing this out there from personal experience, but community centers, libraries, I don't know if they have security, but they're open significantly later than most city buildings and very accessible to the public, so that's a potential option.
And I think that's an option for you, but Ed, because we've had people threaten us. I haven't had it on this board, one of the old board. I had to call the police to escort me to my car because somebody was threatening to shoot me. And so I just think because the case review committee attracts a lot of sometimes drama, that we need some kind of a security or a secured place. Thank you.
Dr. Cass, I think that your point is well made. I think that we need to be considerate of everybody's time in the committees and try and find a time that's going to work easier for most people, and I think that will probably resolve the issues that we've experienced most recently. So thanks for bringing that up, and I think we've got some movement forward on that. Okay. That concludes item 9 on the agenda. Moving to item 10, the consent agenda cases. Member St. John.
Okay, the consent agenda, these are the administratively closed cases that we voted to move forward to the full board. We have cases 06819, 15819, 19919, 06919, 187-19, 200-19, 12119, 19019, 21119, 13919, 19719, 154-19, 198-19. And I'd like to make a motion to accept these cases that are administratively closed.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Start with you.
So I have 3 cases that I wanted to discuss on this list. I'd like to request that 2 of them be moved to the non-consent agenda, 069-19 and 187-19.
Repeat the second.
187-19.
Thank you.
And the third case, I guess it's just a quick comment here, 197-19. I'm not sure who the investigator on this was, but I just wanted to compliment the agency and staff on this investigation. Reading through it, it was very thorough and high quality, and I felt like this is sort of a model investigation to me. So I just wanted to give that feedback.
Would you like to, are we going to discuss those two cases?
I also want to pull out 12119 for a discussion
Okay.
item. So that gives us 3. Anybody else want to talk about anything? Okay. So, do you want to lead the discussion on, I have something on 6919 as well, but do you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. So 06919, I've raised this issue before, and this one is a little more cut and dry to me. It's a lapel violation that was not recommended for discipline here. The incident occurred on 1/28/19. The complaint was filed on 3/14/19, and the letter was drafted on July 10th, 2019. And I guess my question here is why this lapel violation was let slide, because we've seen plenty of these where it wasn't, and then we've seen others where it was. And I know that the last case that I raised, I believe it was 068-19, actually the one right before this. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, no, 068-19 is on our consent agenda, where the lapel was actually critical to proving that the allegations by the complainant were false. Now, I know in the past on these lapel violations, we've heard from the director that they were not recommended for discipline because they fell out of the union mandated time period. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's 180 days. And this would appear to fall within that timeline. So I'm a little bit concerned about why this was ignored, and just the general sense that we need to have a consistent policy on this. And if we're going to recommend discipline on these things, we need to be consistent across the board.
Chair Galloway, Member Olivas, this is the same case that you asked us about 2 months ago. And it's just now coming through because of the delay, and it would have been heard last month. And as I explained in my email to the board, I was mistaken that this was not about time, and you do have the correct explanation. This was about the fact that under administratively closed cases, we can, if it's a minor violation and is a level 7, and if there is no history involving the officer for that type of complaint, we can administratively close it, and so that was the decision.
So if you administratively close it, you can't say, recommend that, or find fault? Is that what you're saying? You can't do both? You can't administratively close it, and you can't find fault with the officer not following policy? You can't do both at the same time?
And wouldn't they be 2 separate complaints? Because that was not one that was originally part of the complaint. It would be a sustained finding not based on the original complaint, if I have that verbiage correctly?
You do.
Okay. That was my very same question.
So we did talk about this at case review as well, and that it was a recurring case here. But I also just wanted to reiterate that I have a concern around if there isn't a pattern of this behavior, we don't
Make a pattern.
document and hold accountable for this behavior, because then how do you establish a pattern of behavior? So I know I've stated that before, but I just like it.
Director Harness.
Chair Galloway, Member Armijo Pruitt, as we discussed last month with the passing of the performance policy that will dictate the early intervention system, there is a way previously of establishing a pattern which the monitor has prohibited the practice of using additional concern memos. Those additional concern memos would be a track record. A track record now would be an administratively closed minor violation for not recording because it is technically a sustained, but there is no recommendation for discipline. The furtherance of this system is that now what we have been administratively closing previously, not necessarily because of a minor violation, But for other administratively closed cases where we cannot minimally substantiate the allegations, those are going to be unfounded as we move forward. So it is my decision, it was my decision that we administratively closed this case based upon the history of the officer and this complaint.
Do we want to make a motion on this? Do we want to, you said that you wanted to move this to the non-consent agenda. Would you like to?
I'm not comfortable moving this through, however we want to move it. But I don't think that that sets a good precedent, and I'm trying to think back here on what you just said. But I guess it kind of goes back to what Member Armijo Pruitt said, that just because it's a low-level violation, we shouldn't recommend any disciplinary action. And I realize that given that it's a level 7, very low-level thing, that's probably what, a verbal reprimand by supervisor or something very minor. Why wouldn't we recommend that? And I'm saying this too as a protection for the officer, because like I referenced to 068-19, the lapel camera works for police officers in showing that complaints are in fact unfounded in many cases. And so not using this device properly or intentionally disabling, or whatever the case was here, is potentially problematic for the officer. So it just seems like we should be consistent.
And I think
Chair, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Chair Galloway, Member Olivas, the definition for administratively closed is set in the CASA, and that's the definition. So we are following the definition of administratively closed to the letter of admin closed. This is not even what the monitor has allowed us to expand for preliminary investigations. The definition, as in the CASA, states minor violations where there is not a pattern. If you're not comfortable with that and you don't want to follow the recommendation, then the board has the purview to review the investigative file and make their recommendation.
That's true. I would just point out that in this particular instance, I mean, it was very clearly laid out by the investigator or yourself, whoever wrote the letter, that it was a minor violation that was found in the course of the investigation, though it wasn't the complaint. I mean, like, we got it. We got it in the letter on that one. Also, what was I going to say to you? There was something, oh, no, it was, Eric, a point that you made about disciplinary action for the officers. Like, even beyond that, that's a piece of what we do. But for the complainant to have that sustained finding as well, I mean, I think that they're entitled to that when there is something that is wrong in the interactions that they have with the police department. To have that validated, I think, is important for the community.
Well, I would go back to your point of the case may be administratively closed, but it is possible for, in the course of investigation, to find something like this and say a finding not based on the complaint. So those are two different apples to me. Mm-hmm. What the director's saying is that the definition by the monitor is that that it should be classified as a minor infraction because he has no other past thing. I think Ms. Pruitt's point is well taken, and I think we're uncomfortable with saying it's okay in this instance and it's not okay in this instance, and that's the problem. We are here to be fair arbiters of sharing our concerns and looking for better behavior. So that's the part that's not being answered by anybody right now. So I understand what you're saying, Director Harness, but it doesn't address the issue of how does this get to be okay in this instance and not in another one.
Anybody else? Okay,
I'm okay with, I mean, you can label it whatever you want to call it, administratively closed, but what I'm getting at here is that there's no disciplinary action it's just inconsistent. So I understand what you're saying about administratively closed. In the past, I've seen these labeled as sustained, even though the original complaint was unfounded. I've seen these labeled as sustained complaints. So number one, why aren't we doing that? And if we are leaving it, or why didn't we do that? And if you do leave it as administratively closed, why can't we attach a disciplinary recommendation or whatever is standard for a sustained complaint?
Chair Galloway, Member Olivas, if that's the recommendation you want to make, then the body should make that recommendation. I stand by the decision that we made.
so I think that our option is to accept the case now that we've had some discussion and some answers from Director Harness, or make a motion to the effect of, and I don't want to speak for anybody, but I would think that the motion would look something like to administratively close the complaint, the original complaint, but sustain the
new
policy violation that was uncovered during the investigation. But I can't do that, so.
I would like to make a motion that the board adopt the agency's findings, that the original complaint was unfounded, but that in the course of the investigation, an additional policy violation, a minor lapel camera violation, was discovered and documented or
Sustain the complaint.
sustained that follow-up complaint. The CPC is 069-19.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Awesome. Okay, so if we can make that change to 6919, do you want to pick up 18719 as well?
This one's not so much of a non-concurrence type of thing. I guess it's just kind of that I had a question here on what the policy on handshakes is here. So that's kind of what the meat of this complaint comes down to, is that this officer refused to shake someone's hand. I realize that there's kind of a delicate balance there between officer safety, but the entire narrative of what was happening here didn't really seem like that was an issue, and coming from where I come from in the CPCs and that type of thing, there's also the other side of that, which is building a community partnership and building trust, and so I'm just kind of, I don't really have an opinion on this. I don't think I have enough information on sort of what happened, and so I'm just wondering if you can provide any guidance on what that policy says and any other information you can give.
Chair Galloway, Member Olivas, there is no reference to handshaking in the professional code of conduct for APD in their professional conduct policies 1-4. It is not addressed.
So you want to leave that one on the consent agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. 12119, very similarly, I don't have any issue with the case itself, but with one portion of one sentence in the findings letter, there's a piece that says the sergeant was very straightforward with her. It's unnecessary. It doesn't add anything at all to the intent of the letter. And I would say that it's arguably inappropriate because it's inserting an opinion, like this shouldn't have even been a question. And I don't think that that's the place in its place is not in a findings letter. So I would just ask that that sentence, that piece of that sentence be removed in the findings letter.
I'm sorry, which one is that?
It's CPC 12119, and it's, if I recall, it's about 2/3 down the page of maybe page 2, if that's a 3-pager. Maybe broaching the 3/4 line. think he's looking for that portion of the findings letter.
I'm sorry, I'm still not finding it.
I can show you later, like if the board doesn't have any objection to removing that piece of the document. It really was pretty superfluous.
So you, excuse me, Chair Galloway, you don't like the reference to the sergeant being categorized as straightforward?
Yeah. I think it says verbatim, the sergeant was very straight with her, if I'm not mistaken. And it's just unnecessary, and it's an opinion, and I don't think an opinion should be included in the, not
Chair Galloway,
referring to the fact.
is that an opinion or an investigative finding based upon
I think that's
the
pretty
review?
open to interpretation.
In context of the complaint as it was received?
Will you read the sentence, that particular sentence?
I would suggest we could do this offline.
The end agreement by the sergeant was to pass along a message to a different sergeant regarding her case about custodial interference and investigate the incident with security at Lovelace. The sergeant was very straight with her that they did not have enough information to investigate what happened regarding the rock that struck her.
Yeah, I would say.
I mean, it's honest, straight. He explained to her why they couldn't perform the investigation that she was requesting.
Yeah, I think it's unnecessary. I think you could leave it with the sergeant explained to her they didn't have enough information to blah, 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 whatever that says, just that opinion piece of it. I think is unnecessary. I don't know. That's my,
I'm not going to oppose that or anything like that, but I just would say that it's my personal opinion that the board should sort of avoid meddling in the nuances of language differences that we might individually have. I might use the word straight, you might use the words clear. I mean, we could go on and on and on, and every one of us would write that letter a little differently, and I don't really think that's our job as supervisors of the director. I don't have an opposition to it, but I just think we should avoid that kind of micromanagement. And
I understand what you're saying. I do wonder, I think part of our job is, though, to, we're helping to improve the relationship between the citizens, right, civilians, and the police. And these letters are sort of a little PR packet for people who have complaints. So when they receive them, it's important that they feel heard, they feel like all the steps were taken, and that there isn't any wording in there that might make it seem like there was a predisposition to not take their complaints or concerns seriously. And so some of these might seem like kind of nitpicky details, but I think sometimes there's a feeling that you can get from these that can convey that. And I don't think that they're intended to even, but sometimes I think multiple eyes can pick up on something that when you're in the middle of writing something, you might not notice. And so I do think that's part of our purview, personally. That's my opinion.
May I? Chair Galloway and Member Armijo-Pruitt, I think that one of the essential parts that are missing here is that this is a review from your standpoint of a complaint and a letter, not the 2 or 3 hours of video that was reviewed, the police reports that were reviewed, and the entire context of the investigation. So perhaps how you see it, simply based upon a complaint and a findings letter, you might have a different point of view about the communication style if in fact you saw everything.
More to the point, though, how might the complainant feel upon receiving that? To me, it came across as demeaning and unnecessary and kind of snarky. And I'm not the one who was put in a position to file a complaint. Like, somebody's emotionally invested in this. Somebody feels as though there was a wrong. And to have that, when it's just unnecessary, like, to the point, without getting into all of that, it's not necessary, it doesn't add anything to it. So why do that? Why leave it in there? It's my request, the board does not have to agree with that, but that was my ask.
I'd like to call the question.
Yeah, thank you. So there's a motion on the floor to
There's not actually.
There
It may
is.
just.
Valerie made a motion and I seconded it for these cases to go, to be passed forward. So there is a motion on the floor.
Okay, you're right. Motion to approve all of the administratively closed cases as is.
Call the vote.
All
those in favor? Aye.
All right, those opposed? Me? Just me, because I thought we were changing 6919 and at the very least.
Vote, please.
I did, it's just me.
We already did.
We didn't. The motion and the second was to move all of those cases forward. We were in discussion when we did all of that.
But a motion was made, seconded, and voted on to change the language
You're
of
right.
069-19.
Forgive me, you're right. So
So-
all of those with the exception of 6919.
Right.
All right,
Those would be necessary corrections. Okay, when you make that motion.
Yeah, with the corrections.
and unfounded and exonerated cases?
Okay, we have cases 045-19, 110-19, 165-19, and 172-19, and 189-19. And I'd like to make a motion to accept the findings.
I second.
All in favor? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 And sustained.
Sustained, we have case 144-19. And I'd like to make a motion to accept the new findings in this case.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So those both are unanimous, Katrina, on B and C. The agenda item number 11 was deferred. The non-consent agenda holds 06919. Non-concurrence cases. 18418. 18418 is listed.
Oh, that's one. Did you want to talk about that?
Chair Galloway, this is simply pointing out that the chief did not concur with the findings in this case. 18418, and he did send a non-concurrence letter where the board recommended a sustained finding for bias. The chief did not concur with that finding and found it to be unfounded. And that letter is in your packet, and it's also up on in SharePoint for chief's letters. We specifically put these on here to make it easier for the monitor to see the non-concurrence cases for the reporting period. That way, he can pick them out.
Sure. Okay. No serious use of force, no Garrity materials that we need to vote on. We've done 16. Any other business? I think it's just Personnel Committee, if I'm not mistaken, that needs to call a member for the time being. I don't know if we want to rotate attendance at those meetings. An option for consideration so that we stay fairly in tune when we pick up. Okay, so who wants to volunteer not to come this month? It will not be me.
I'll do
Okay, you are off the hook this month. Thank you. Any other business? Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor? All righty, thank you, everybody. I know, I remembered that after I said it.
You don't need what?